He's Bob Costas from Football Night in America. He joins us here. He's got Cowboys and the Giants, where you'll be at the Meadowlands coming up this weekend. Is this business or pleasure that you're here for?
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Dan, but I'm on my way to the Meadowlands to interview Odell Beckham of the Giants for Sunday night's pregame show.
Toughest interview you've had?
Well, there's two ways to define that. If the person is combative, people may remember the Vince McMahon thing from HBO, no commercials, live, 27, 28 minutes of virtually uninterrupted tension. And then there was the Sandusky thing, which was newsworthy, and it was a little bit of a tightrope walk. But actually the hardest ones, and I think you'd probably agree, if the person is just boring or unresponsive, if you can't get anything, those are really the toughest ones. If Bill Belichick didn't want to play ball with you, but if somehow the league forced him and he didn't want to pay the fine like Marshawn Lynch to sit here with you for half an hour and the entire thing was, we're on to Cincinnati, that would be difficult.
Should Marshawn Lynch be forced to talk?
I don't think so, actually. I don't think so. I think there might be certain situations where you have to make yourself available in a press conference situation, the way they bring usually the quarterback or the star of the game or the coach in. But the idea that you have to speak at your locker or whatever, I think that's a bit too regimented. Steve Carlton didn't speak to the press. George Hendrick was one of the nicest guys I ever met, Silent George. One of the nicest guys in baseball. He would politely not speak.
Eddie Murray?
Eddie Murray has become an extremely nice and approachable guy later in his career and in retirement. He had a bit of a chip on his shoulder earlier, but I didn't have any problem with Eddie not talking with the media, generally speaking. Yeah, I think there are times when you need to be more aware. And Eddie and I are friends. Eddie grew up with Ozzie Smith, and Ozzie and I are close because of St. Louis. So I've been to dinner with Eddie many times, and I've gotten to know him, and I respect him. But think back, if this story isn't too old or boring, 1995 World Series. Baseball's coming off the disastrous strike and the whole thing. They're trying to come back. Cleveland and Atlanta meet in the World Series. Braves win the first two games. Cleveland wins Game 3 to get back in it in front of a roaring crowd in Cleveland. They haven't had a World Series since 1954, and he gets the winning hit in the bottom of the 10th inning. And he's coming off, and Jim Gray is, hey, can we talk to you? At that point, you got to say to yourself, I kind of owe it to baseball to say, yeah, it was great. I hit a slider. We're back in the series. See you tomorrow. That's all you need. He's not going to ask you about your background or your opinion about who should win the presidential election.
Well, he might. It's Jim.
Well, I take it back.
What did you think when Jim kind of cornered Pete Rose and tried to get him to basically come clean on gambling?
Full disclosure here, because it's only fair. Jim talked to me the morning of the game, and he said, what are some questions you would ask Pete Rose? But in my mind's eye, all those guys from the All-Century team, because that was the night they announced the All-Century team. So, Mickey Mantle's family's there. He had passed away, but Sandy Koufax is there, and Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, they're all there, okay? And what we envisioned was during the course of the game, there'd be a box that these guys would be in, and then you'd go to Jim, and he'd ask a question or two. So we discussed the questions. Then it turned out that he got Pete in the immediate aftermath. The best analogy I can offer is, let's suppose that one of Nixon's daughters had gotten married right in the middle of Watergate. Every legitimate question you could ask Nixon, you still don't ask while they're coming down the steps of the church, all right? Even there, so this is Pete's moment, because basically what the fans said in electing him to the All-Century team wasn't that he was one of the 30 greatest players or 6 greatest outfielders. He's somewhere on the list, but probably not that short of a list. But this was their Hall of Fame vote for Pete. This was his moment. And so after asking the one question, I think Jim now realizes that he should have backed off. Every question Jim asked him, if he'd asked it on this show, on the Today Show, on Meet the Press in a different context, was a legitimate question. It was the time and the tone that worked against Jim.
What if we left it to the public to put Pete Rose on the ballot? Since the public is the one that goes to the Hall of Fame, this is a museum, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a holier-than-thou view of baseball's Hall of Fame when it's for the fans. Do the fans want to see Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame? Is that fair?
Definitely. I think if you put it to a fan vote, they would just say, we're tempering justice with mercy here. We're not saying that what he didn't deserve punishment. And good God, hasn't he been punished in multiple ways already? I think fans not only want him on the ballot, I think they want him in the Hall of Fame. And the argument, I think, is a convincing one. Look, guys who clearly use steroids, some of them admitted steroid guys, they may not be in the Hall, but they're on the ballot.
Yeah.
Put Pete on the ballot, restart the clock because he was never on it, and see what happens from there.
He's Bob Costas joining us here in the New York City Man Cave, Dan Patrick Show. If somebody doesn't agree to an interview with you,
Yeah.
take it personally? Is it a compliment?
I can't ever remember taking it personally. Sometimes it's a compliment because you know if a person is in the midst of controversy, there are certain people they just as soon avoid because they know they're going to get forthright questions. I hope not unfair questions, but forthright questions. So sometimes you can infer that the person's saying, I'm going over here where more softballs will be thrown. But I can't remember ever taking it personally. That
But if
a person
Tom
turned me
Brady's
down.
not available,
Yeah, and sometimes he's not.
you don't take it personally?
No. I've had a number of good interviews with Tom. If they make the Super Bowl this year, I'll probably do an interview with Tom. He'll recognize, the importance of that. But whatever they want to do is okay with me.
See, I was always concerned that you see, strategically, you'll pick a place and go, that's where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Lance Armstrong picked Oprah.
Right.
For whatever reason, picked Oprah. I don't know if Bill Cosby is going to pick Oprah when he does his interview. If A-Rod is going to do an interview. Mark McGuire picked you to do an interview. Chance of getting A-Rod? Have you reached out to him?
He and I have been in contact, but we're actually in periodic contact over the years. And he knows that if he ever wants to sit down and do an interview, that I'd be willing to do it. But everybody has their own approach. I'm not one of those people who really works an interview subject and is constantly sending them gifts or making phone calls and pestering them. If someone knows of my general interest, they basically know what I do and how I do it. And if that's where they wind up going, then that's fine with me. I think in general, if it was Mark McGuire, if it's Lance Armstrong, if it's A-Rod, you don't do yourself any good if you don't go to a place that's credible. You need to go to a place that's long form because you don't want to be sound bitten.
Yeah.
But you need to go to a place where you're not going to be ambushed, but where the person's going to be fair, knowledgeable, but credible. Because if they just softball you, that actually puts you further behind the eight ball, I think.
And we're always critical. We always kind of pick and choose when we look at somebody like Oprah. Did she do a great job with Lance? Or James Brown interviewed Michael Vick when he first came back. And did he pick him for you start to psychoanalyze it. A lot of it's jealousy in our business, too. That, we didn't get the interview. Adrian Peterson, how much would you push to try to get something like that? Well, not push, but...
If it's newsworthy, pardon me, if it's newsworthy, I want to do it. I want to do an interview with Roger Goodell as soon as he's ready to sit down. But I want it to be long form. I want it to be, if possible, on the Super Bowl with a good chunk where we have a long lead up to the game, so we're not time crunched.
But if you could do Goodell or Peterson right now,
Goodell, because the issues are broader.
Yeah.
But I would do both if I could.
Where do you stand on the Peterson story? Should he be reinstated? He served his punishment. Should he be able to play? Leave it up to the Vikings.
Here's what I suspect has happened here. The NFL has made a stand that they hope goes a bit further toward assuring the public that they get it, and they're going to continue to get it closer to right. If the Players Association prevails in their pushback, then the league can always say, well, this was our position, the Players Association prevailed, and that's that. I think that's probably where they stand.
Was there some grandstanding going on?
Well, I guess that's a little bit of the implication.
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit. I can't read minds, and I don't have any inside information. But, you got to remember, in the case of Peterson, Greg Hardy, these guys have been suspended with pay. So really, their teams are the ones that have been penalized more than they have in a tangible way.
I would like to see the owners of the Vikings. It would be on them if you want to employ them. Instead of making the commissioner, this is why you pay the commissioner to kind of lead the battle. But if you said to the Wilfs, you want to play him, you play him. If you don't, then you release him.
Mm-hmm. Well, they certainly don't want to release him because they know that he can still play and play at a high level, and eventually he's going to be reinstated.
But do they want to play him?
He's not Ray Rice.
Yes, but do they want to play him? If you said to the Wilfs, you want to play him, you had the opportunity to play him.
Again, I can't read minds. They're not really in the playoff hunt.
Yeah.
It might be different if they were and they needed these last few games. There's always overlapping, considerations there.
Look at you picking your words carefully. I'm going to ask you about being opinionated, though, at halftime. When you do these essays, and it never ceases to amaze me. Anytime I talk race, child abuse, it could be domestic abuse, people say the same thing, stick to sports. I want to ask you about that we're not allowed to color outside the lines and have an opinion on what is everyday life for us. So,
only Bob Lee can color outside the lines.
Oh, there you go. And Jeremy Schaap as well.
Right.
Yes.